Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our class. We are going to be your teachers for today's lesson. I am teacher Mary Christine Hikale, and together with me is my co-teacher, teacher Nikki Alvarez. Now, before we jump right away with our discussion proper, let us first have an activity. And the title of our activity is called Let's Investigate. I have here a QR code, or you may go to padlet.com and click on the link for our activity. Now, in Padlet, I want you to share your thoughts about the three scenarios which we are going to see on the next slides. Now, what are these scenarios? These are the daily experiences or the daily moments and happenings inside the classroom between how a teacher delivers the lesson or how the students perceive the lesson themselves. So we are going to see the scenarios later on, and then I want you to share your thoughts, your ideas, your reactions, or what could have been done better from those scenarios through the Padlet, which you are going to. So, scenario one, let's read them together. Teacher A is continuously discussing the entire time during their class. Without asking for any clarification, she proceeds right away with the next topic. So, write your thoughts about it. Is teacher A having the best strategy? Having the best teaching strategy, or what could have been done better by teacher A? So please do write your thoughts in Padlet. So we now have scenario 2, and let us again read them together. Teacher D was having a discussion. Before proceeding to the next topic, she asked for any clarification. She called a student first and then presented the question. So again, write your thoughts. Is teacher D way better than teacher A? Is she doing the best strategy already, or what's the twist in this scenario? So what do you think? Is it correct that she called the student first and then presented the question, or should it be the other way around? You present the question first and then you call a student, so allowing them to have enough time to compose and formulate their answer. So it's up to you, and let's hear your thoughts. And we are down to our last scenario, which is scenario 3. Teacher B was the one talking the entire time during the class. She also then proceeds with giving the assessment and evaluation right after discussing. So I guess this scenario here is very familiar, and it's also very common, and I think we'd all agree that teacher B wasn't definitely following the student-centered approach here, because as mentioned, she was the one talking the entire time. So that's my point also, but I can't wait to hear your thoughts about these three scenarios in our Padlet, and as a form of participation for today's lesson as well. And you might be wondering, why are we talking about these scenarios? Why are we talking about a teacher's teaching strategy, or how do students feel about this? Well, that is because for this afternoon's lesson, we are going to talk about the different formative assessment strategies in teaching biology. And we are going to be again your teachers for this afternoon. I'm teacher Mary Christine Hikali, and together with me is teacher Nikki Alvarez. And by the end of our discussion, it is expected that all of you would be able to identify what is formative assessment strategies, identify its importance in terms of our daily life experiences in the classroom, and be able to list the different kinds of formative assessment strategies, and not just be able to identify them, but be able to come up with practical ways of applying them in real life classroom setup and make use of them, of course, especially that most of us are also teaching already. Let us define what is formative assessment strategies. Now, from its name, strategy, well, it has something to do with the techniques and ways and how to effectively deliver a lesson or probably conduct a discussion proper in our classroom. Now, as mentioned in the PowerPoint presentation, these strategies are designed to provide ongoing feedback to improve student learning. Now, why is it important to provide feedback? Well, just like what they always say, it's good to hear, especially constructive feedbacks, because through this, you'd be able to reflect on yourself, reflect on ourselves as teachers, on are we really doing the appropriate strategy, and be able to assess our students also. Are we able to provide them an atmosphere or like a classroom atmosphere where they are free to ask for any clarifications or just simply ask a question, especially when there's something during our discussion which is bothering them or not so clear to them. And so, why is it important to have these formative assessment strategies in teaching biology? First of all, it is to identify learning gaps. And we all know for a fact that, especially with our PISA ranking, in terms of reading and writing, even in math and sciences, it's very vivid that our students are really lagging behind. There are a lot of learning gaps occurring. Probably it's also because of due to some factors, and one of which is to be able to have the appropriate formative assessment strategy. So through this, we hope to bridge this gap, to close this learning gap, and perhaps address this learning gap by providing timely feedback with our strategies and thus be able to create a collaborative learning environment. So, as teachers, we hope to be able to conduct appropriate and reliable formative assessment strategies. Let us now start discussing the different strategies, formative assessment strategies in teaching biology. We actually divided into three categories. Now I'm going to discuss category 1 and my partner will be discussing category 2 and 3. Now in category 1, these are real-time technology aided and rapid feedback strategies. So from its name, rapid feedback, these strategies we get to have the chance to acquire students' response on the spot, and also not just that, these strategies are also quick and somehow easier to make than the other strategies in category 2 and 3. Now we have strategy 1. This is called student response systems or SRS. It is also referred to as clickers. Now we might not know, but actually most of us are doing this during our discussion, because this is basically those times when, in the middle of our discussions, we suddenly pop up questions which could assess, or let's say, for example, we're discussing about the parts of the cell, and then out of a sudden, we pop up a picture, and then we want our students to identify which part of the cell is it. So, basically, student response systems, these are activities where you just have to flash or project a question on the screen and then let your students answer. But the thing about this is that you have to really make sure that the questions are able to like challenge the students. So let's say for example, your question is a true or false question. Now, you have to make sure that for example, the answer is false. So you just don't stop there. You have to ask your students, why is it false or what makes it false? Because through this you get to challenge them, you get to assess if whether they could really apply what you've been discussing all along. So the benefit of this SRS strategy is that for a short period of time you get to have a lot of questions tackled, and at the same time the what you call this the challenge is, would you be able to challenge your students for them to like really make use of what they've been learning, something like that. So that's strategy one. Let's go to strategy two. It is called the muddiest point. Well, I at first I was wondering why is it called the muddiest point, but now I kind of get the idea. When we see mud, like yutik or lapok, we kind of think like kahugaw or like kagubot, and you wanted to really clean it up right away. And I think that is why this strategy is named as such, because this is when you want your students to point out a certain part of your discussion, or probably a certain topic that is left unclear to them. So like something that's confusing to them, you want your students to point it out. Now, why I kind of like this strategy, it is because you'd be able to specifically know what your students are confused about, and you'd be able to specifically answer right away also, and be able to address such unclear concept. And I think this comes naturally when we ask our students any question regarding this topic before we proceed, and then they would say, teacher, something about this and that, and then you get to address it right away. So the response, the student teacher engagement or interaction is there, and it's very quick. So you have the question and then you answer right away. So the goal here is to address the muddiest point, the unclear concept. Strategy three is not new to all of us, I believe, because this strategy is very common. We have been using it in order to make our class like productive and at the same time fun. We call it entry and exit slips or minute papers. So these are instrumental in checking if our students really caught what we've been teaching. And aside from that, I think one of, if I may share, an activity which I think is part of this strategy, that is like sometimes other teachers or even I myself, you have a ball and then you play a music, and whoever holds the ball when the music stops has to answer, right? So I think most of us are doing it. It's very common. We see it online also, and we've experienced it with our teachers as well. And one thing which I'm also doing, I would just like to share as well. I used to give papers with numbers to my students. So let's say, for example, I have 40 students. So I prepare papers with numbers 1 to 40. And then whenever I have questions to ask, I just ask a student to like say a number randomly. And then, for example, she says 9. And the student who is holding number 9 has to answer the question. So through this, we get to add thrill, because you're leaving it to faith on who will be answering. So it's fun, it's thrilling, but at the same time, you're also trying to let your students become like more engaged to the discussion, because they will not know who will be answering. So they would surely like listen, right? And like it keeps the class fun and engaging at the same time. So I think through this strategy, students get to like you get or the teacher gets to introduce an activity that is new aside from the traditional question and answer. So there's a kind of like a twist or a new thing. And we are now down to our last two strategy. And strategy four is misconception checks. I believe this is one of those strategy which is very relevant nowadays, especially that with the advent of technology, where information, all kinds of information is just one click away. And unfortunately, we don't have any like tools yet, fact checking tools, which could allow us to make sure that our students have access to only reliable and valid information. So, strategy four will allow us teachers to let our students apply their previous knowledge to correct the mistake or the, let's say, misconception that is found, or probably like it's present during our discussion. And from even from our undergraduate study, like in our group, for example, we did study about the sources and causes of misconceptions, and unfortunately, one of part of the top three sources is the teacher themselves. Probably it's also because they had this misconception when they were still students and were left unaddressed as they progress from one grade level to another. That is why I believe this strategy is very timely. It's very important to really address misconceptions, because when it's left unaddressed, people or students, our students, will think that it is actually true, and therefore they cannot really connect it with higher level, like biological concepts in the future. So how can we do this, or how can we apply this in our discussion? I think through activities like scenario analysis, or like when we oh, also when we allow them to critique some research or some studies, so our students would be able to like apply their knowledge from our discussion and hopefully use it to correct the misconceptions which they would encounter. And with our last strategy, which is directed paraphrasing, well, I think this strategy usually happens like when the discussion is about to end already, because I think this is when we ask someone from our class, two or three students, to summarize or like give takeaways, share what are their takeaways from the discussion, and we are going to assess if they were really able to grasp and comprehend with the discussion through their answers, of course. And we also wanted to make sure that aside from like reading the or giving definitions that is found from the book or from their notebooks, for example, we tend to like guide them, to let them share their ideas, to be able to like not just merely paraphrase or like just copy from what was during our discussion, but be able to paraphrase it like their own way, like the insight or the meaning must have come from what they've understood, something like that. And aside from that, it's also very important, like upon using this strategy, we have to make sure that the students are also able to apply the discussion or like the concept with the real life scenarios, because I think that is what science or biology in our case is all about, like being able to apply the concept in real life, like outside the four corners of our classroom. And so those are our 5 strategies under category 1. Do you have any questions or a muddiest point which you have there? So you may comment it in our comment box if you do have questions or something that is confusing you. But if you don't have one, I am now giving the floor to Miss Nikki Alvarez, my co-teacher for this afternoon. But before that, let's have a very quick review. Again, what are those 5 strategies under category 1? Okay, we have SRS, Student Response Systems, correct? We also have the muddiest point, and then entry and exit slips. We also have misconception checks, and the last one, directed paraphrasing. Well, again, thank you so much everyone for listening. That's it for category 1. And let us now discuss category 2 and 3.
Good day, everyone. I'm teacher Nikki Alvarez, and today we'll continue our exploration of formative assessment strategies, focusing on how visual and conceptual reasoning can help us become better science learners and thinkers. We'll talk about 3 very powerful strategies that teachers use to assess learning in biology. These are student-generated models, concept mapping, and the defining features matrix. Later, we'll also explore how discussion, reflection, and journaling can help us think like real scientists. Let's start with strategy 6, student-generated models, such as diagrams, simulations, and phylogenetic trees. Modeling is a foundational pedagogical practice in life sciences, utilizing various model types such as the use of phylogenetic trees, conceptual diagrams, animations, and simulations. When students create their own models for formative evaluation, they express their understanding through different modes, making the classroom environment more inclusive. Like in biology, we often study processes that are complex and invisible to the naked eye. Like, for example, cellular respiration, gene regulation, or evolutionary relationships. One of the best ways if students really understand these processes is to ask them to build their own models, and these models take many forms. Next, we have strategy 7, concept mapping. It is a widely known and an effective formative assessment strategy. This strategy helps students visualize how ideas are connected. Like in biology, we write key biological terms such as cell, nucleus, DNA, and protein synthesis. Then we ask the students to connect them using phrases or words to describe their relationships. For example, DNA contains instructions for protein synthesis, the nucleus controls the activities of the cell. So, those connecting phrases are the heart of the map. They show how and why concepts are related. So, this is an example of how concept mapping is done. Concept mapping allows teachers to see whether the students understand the connectedness of concepts and terms and not just isolated facts. It is a great formative assessment tool because it makes invisible thinking visible. And students can use this for their review, for exam review, and also to summarize what they have learned. Our next strategy is strategy 8, which is defining features matrix. This one looks like a simple table or grid, but this one is a very powerful tool or technique in understanding how well the students can differentiate and categorize biological facts. So in this strategy, students will be tasked to complete a table where different biological concepts are listed along rows, and then their essential features and attributes are also listed along the other columns. So here's how it works. This is an example of a table or a grid in which in one of the columns, the first column, are the characteristics of a cell or cells. And then on the other columns are examples of specimens. Specimens 1, 2, 3, and 4, in which students are asked to describe their characteristics. In this strategy, students will mark which characteristics or which characteristic belongs to which type of cell. So in this strategy, this will help students compare and contrast biological entities and recognize key defining characteristics. Now, as a teacher, by analyzing their answers, we can easily see which features or which concepts students are confused with. And then from that, we can plan lessons or that can address those gaps. Now that we've covered visual and conceptual strategies, let's now move to category 3, which are the discourse, reflection, and metacognitive strategies. These techniques focus on communication, reasoning, and self-awareness, which are essential skills for every future scientist. One of the most interactive formative assessments is the in-class discussions or debate. Here, the students share their ideas, defend their reasoning, and listen to others' perspective. As a teacher, we observe how they explain their concepts or scientific concepts, how they construct their arguments, and how they respond to evidences. So an example, if we let students debate, should genetically modified foods be allowed in our agriculture? So through that debate, I as a teacher can assess not only their biological knowledge but also how well they think critically and explain scientifically. So the key to making this strategy effective is by listening carefully during their debate. Through our observation, we can gather valuable formative evidence about how students think and reason. Our final strategy is written journals and individual writing responses. This strategy encourages students to regularly reflect on what they have learned by sharing their thoughts, their confusions, and new insights after every lesson. Over time, journals becomes a mirror of their learning journey. This journaling can help them track their growth, express their ideas using their own words, and think deeply about how biology connects to life or real life. So here's an example of students' written journal. When teachers read these reflections, they gain valuable insights into each student's thought process, misconceptions, and their level of critical thinking. Review and wrap up. Let's summarize what we've learned today. These are the formative strategies for biology. Formative assessment strategies for biology. Strategy 1, student response systems. Strategy 2, the muddiest point. Strategy 3, entry and exit slips or minute papers. Strategy 4, misconception checks. Strategy 5, directed paraphrasing. Strategy 6, student-generated models such as diagrams, simulations, and phylogenetic trees. Strategy 7, concept mapping. Strategy 8, defining features matrix. Strategy 9, the in-class discussion, argumentation, and debate. And last, or finally, strategy 10, written journals and individual writing responses. Before we end, here's a quick formative quiz to check your understanding. Kindly read and answer each question carefully. Are there any questions? Remember, formative assessments isn't just for grading. It's for growing. It's how we continuously learn, reflect, and improve. Thank you and God bless.